Oh, no. I can't because I don't have it.
I'm sure you could freehand it.
Yeah, I am going to just tell you what it does. So I had this entire section on like filters and repeating, and I don't know where
Got
it is
lost
now.
on the internet.
I lost it somewhere between pushing it up to GitHub and now. But basically what ngRepeat does is it's going to take this posts array here, and it's going to say, well, for every post that I have in posts, so it's going to iterate through all of post, and it's going to take every single element, and it's going to assign that temporarily to post. And it's actually going to create a new scope in here. I hope that's not too confusing for you. And what it's going to do is it's going to make that post be available to whatever is subsequently inside this div. We're going to perform some filtering functions onto it using order by. So typically, if you don't have this right now, it'll just populate that list for you, top to bottom, and whatever's first in post is going to be displayed first. By using order by and giving it an element here, what we're actually saying is, hey, can you actually order how we're going to traverse through posts by its created at times? So it's going to do it chronologically, essentially. And I'm passing it another parameter here, true, and that is basically. The third parameter for order by is basically, do you want to reverse this order? So I'm saying true here simply because I want it to be displayed reverse chronologically with the most recent post first. And then you'll see that there's some extra directives that I added in here that are pretty interesting. ng class odd will basically apply this class onto any all the odd posts within our posts, and ng even is going to apply that to all the even posts. Now, this will be useful for styling a little bit later on, so stay with me for now on this. And next, you'll see we're going to create a post.created by here. So the post.created by is going to be just displaying the username that someone put in, and then it'll just say the text after a little says, and it's going to show the timestamp. Now, this isn't formatted at all, so it's not going to look very pretty for now. But let's save this and run our app for the first time.
Oh.
I just needed to allow that content. No worries here. And you'll see we can type in our name. This, again, looks pretty similar to what we had before, but once we actually click that chirp button, you'll see it actually passed that model already to the controller without us having to say anything, just because of the way that ng model does two-way data binding. And you'll see here, since it's pushed it to the post, and post is also bound using this repeat loop, it's automatically going to show up kind of magically.
OK, so that was the reverse data binding that we were talking about, right? Well,
yeah, exactly. Because we're typing in something here, even in our view, it'll bind back into
it binds back into
yeah, exactly. It binds back into the scope, and that's accessible within our controller. So we didn't explicitly have to pass, the name or the content of the chirp to our controller. It already knows that because we already created that the new post as a scope variable.
Nice.
And the same thing is true for the posts array, because the posts array is bound to the view whenever that changes within our scope. Like when we add, for instance, our new chirp into it, it's going to just cheap into it. It's going to it's going to automatically display here. So we can do a couple of other ones, and you'll see because we use the order by parameter true, it's actually going to display reverse chronologically. So the new things that I'm saying is going to appear on top in that repeat. So that works. It doesn't work super well, but it works. It's extremely unattractive as a web page, I must say.
It's simple.
It is simple. It's very minimalist. I think people like that right now. But let's actually go in and add some styling. So we're going to actually just throw some bootstrap on there. That's a term that I've heard Stephen use quite often. Just throw some bootstrap on there.
Yeah, just sprinkle it on there.
And add some formatting. And there's a lot of formatting that we're going to use. So I'm just going to copy this real quick and replace this. So, so let's actually go through and look at what we changed. All we did is we added in this Bootstrap CSS style sheet. And we, of course, also added in the style CSS here. I don't have that created in this app folder. So let's actually create that now. And I'm going to call this, I'm going to call this style CSS. And I'm actually,
if you actually just put the name of the file on the first line and hit save, it'll actually save it as that.
Oh, cool. I didn't know that. I've always saved it separately. I'm going to cheat and get my style sheet from here and just
So this is styling specific for our app.
Yeah, this is styling that I made specifically for our app. So for instance, it'll change the submit button style, the post, and it's actually going to give it, according to the different classes that the ng even, ng odd gave it, I'm going to give it different background colors accordingly. And I've also, formatted the posts a little bit. And that's going to be included here. So I'm going to save this as a new file inside here. I'm going to put it inside a new folder called style sheets. And save it here as style.css. Style.css. Cool. So now that we see it in a directory view here and we linked it here, we can actually run this. Let me just show you one more thing that I did. So whereas before we basically had 3 text tags and we just put them in line, I'm actually going to format each of the cheaps a little bit better. So it'll be, you'll see, but it'll basically say the text on top. It'll say the posted by on bottom. And I'm actually formatting the created by timestamp a little bit using an ng filter. So this is going to, instead of giving it basically the number of milliseconds from the beginning of time, it's actually going to format this into a human readable date format. You can read this about this a little bit more in the ng or in the Angular documentation, but you're basically saying, hey, filter this number of milliseconds is actually, the date, which is as a date, which would be the time on a certain day. This is much clearer once you actually see it running, so let's go ahead and do that. I always close my page and then I always open up a new one, which is not smart, but there we go. Typing in Helen, and then I'm going to type in a nice format. I'm going to compliment myself here. And I'm going to click this chirp button. And you'll see that it's actually styled a little bit better. And more importantly, that date timestamp is going to look much better than it did before. And when we do another one, because of the way that we did our ng even and odd, we're actually going to alternate background colors. Nice. Yeah.
It's pretty.
So we have this, sort of done, but we're actually going to need a couple of new pages. In addition to just this page, we actually will need a login page and and an authentication page as well. So let's go in and create those. We're going to just create the templates for now. And you can see here that this is going to basically create the registration page. I know I didn't need to delete that comment on top, but it definitely bothered me. And I'm going to save this as register. And you can see here, this does pretty similar things. We're going to give it an ng model here for our username. We're going to give it a password here, for our user password here. And we're actually going to put this all in an auth controller. We've, again, added some styling in with the help of Bootstrap and our own little CSS file. And we also associate this with that ng app chirp app, as we did before. So we created basically the models for this, but we don't actually have that auth controller that is needed to power this, this entire div and this entire authentication element. So let's go in and create that. We're going to actually need to create a new controller for it as well because we want to separate those scope things. So we're going to create this auth controller separately, and we're going to call that auth controller just as we did before here. So as you can see, we're still passing in scope, and we're passing in a user and so we're going to create a user scope variable as well as an error message scope variable. That error message should just display to the user, hey, what's wrong with your login if their authentication failed. But for now, since we don't actually have an authentication backend, whenever they click login, we're just going to say, hey, thanks for trying to log in with this username. We're going to do the same for a registration by saying, hey, thanks for registering with this username, and just having that be our login function and our register function for now. So our register HTML, for instance, will do a similar thing to what we did before. On submit of that registration form, it's just going to call this register function. And pretty much we're going to build the exact same thing as a registration page, but for login. So we can essentially actually just copy this, create a new folder, create a new document. Make sure to change this to login, and change the button to actually say login, change the header to say login, and that's going to be our login page. It's going to work pretty much exactly the same way as our registration. So what you're going to notice is, hey, you're using the same auth controller for both your login and your register. Why are you doing that? How can you do that? Well, I mean, you can assign controllers to whatever different views you need. And because we basically need the same scope variables for both, we're just going to reuse one controller and give them different functions to access. That should not be in there. And we're going to just save this. And that should give it the authentication, as well as the login and the registration. So once we save this, we can actually go in and, for instance, look at our registration page. When I try to register, for instance, it's just going to display that registration alert here in our error message, which we defined in our form here, which we defined in our scope variable here, as well as in our form here. And we just bound that to the scope's error message, like so. So because we're running a little bit short on time, we're going to save the routing piece, I think, for module 5.
OK, so you're going to throw that in module 5?
Yeah.
OK.
But essentially, we're just going to go through and, let's look at the 3 pages that we created. We created a login page here, allow block content. We created a main page here, allow block content. And we created that register page here, allow block content. So Stephen is actually going to go through and create the backend for this application now using Node, Express, and Mongo in the next couple of modules. And when we come back, we're going to tie these 3 separate pages into one cohesive single-page application. So you're actually only accessing it from a single page and not clicking around. And we're going to tie that backend in as well.
Awesome. Sounds great. We'll see you guys soon.